Good evening and welcome. Dan and I were just talking about this is just such a delight to see students and practitioners filling these rooms again, and it's something that some of us may have doubted would ever happen again, but it's really wonderful to have you all here. I'm Dave Ferguson, Dean of the Sappenfield College of Architecture and Planning. And to the professionals in the audience, if you did not catch it on the way in, we have AIA and LACES continuing ed credits today. You can sign up in the gallery, and then please fill out our evaluation sheets as well. Your feedback helps us improve our lecture series. So today's lecture by Marlon Blackwell is a Sappenfield lecture, named for the founding dean of the College of Architecture and Planning, Charles Sappenfield, who certainly among the alums would remember. It was Charlie who set the precedent for combining design and theory integrated with community involvement in a very special way that we do here at Ball State. Charlie passed away in 2013, but he lives on in so many memories and in our tradition here in CAP of bringing distinguished practitioners to campus as Sappenfield lecturers. So now I'd like to introduce Assistant Professor of Architecture Dan Overby, who will tell you about today's guest speaker.
Thank you, Dave. Welcome, everybody. I echo that with what Dave said. It's just great to see this room full and even upstairs. Marlon Blackwell, FAIA, is a practicing architect in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and serves as the E. Fay Jones Distinguished Professor at the University of Arkansas. He's the recipient of the 2020 AIA Gold Medal. That's the Institute's highest honor, recognizing those whose work has had an enduring impact on the theory and practice of architecture. Work produced in his firm, Marlon Blackwell Architects, has received recognition with significant publication in more than 160 design awards, including the 2016 Cooper Hewitt National Design Award in Architecture. A monograph of Marlon's early work in architecture of the Ozarks, the works of Marlon Blackwell, was published in 2005, and the new monograph, over here we have several copies we'll be distributing later, Radical Practice, was published earlier this year. And with that, and if I can work the tech, shall we begin?
So I live, practice, teach, and build in Northwest Arkansas, home of the Ozarks, the home of Walmart. We like to call it the land of Bill and a billion chickens. Geographically, we're in many ways located in the middle of nowhere, but more and more we feel like we're considered to be close to everywhere. Arkansas, I consider an environment of real natural beauty and simultaneously one of real constructed ugliness. So abandonment, erasure, nostalgia, exploitation, they're all aspects of this place. I think they sometimes contribute to that perception that we're culturally and aesthetically impoverished, which is certainly in many ways right the opposite. But it is true that I live in a land of disparate conditions. It's not just a setting for our work, it's really part of our work. And I don't see it as a negative. In fact, I see it as a deep source of possibilities in direct engagement with the world as it's given to us in the everyday world. And by choosing to stay for the last 24 years here, what have we been able to do is turn over the rock and discover the underbelly of our place, the visceral presences and the expressive character that really informs and sustains our efforts here. Now, I'm working from a very simple conviction that architecture is larger than the subject of architecture. So what we try to do is look at the world around us with a wide-angle microscopic lens to generate ideas and actions from our direct experience with the everyday, between the ordinary and the extraordinary, between personal history and the history of our discipline. And what that demands of us is to be very careful observers of our place, of the geological, the biological, and always the cultural aspects of place, which has allowed us to develop a more bottom-up process that allows us to amplify the small things that manifest the large things. So in that line of thinking, we can say after the great poet William Carlos Williams in his poem Patterson, is that there are no ideas but in things. And I think this, as contemporary architects, really helps us address some very critical questions. One is, how do you engage the world without being consumed by it? And simultaneously, how do you enrich and dignify the experience of your place for those who engage your work? I think that's something that a set of questions we continue to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And a large part of that is because we're very interested in demonstrating that architecture can happen anywhere, at any scale, in any budget. So we take on all comers, all projects, from the prosaic to the honorific, from a free health clinic to the new architecture school, in an attempt to use design to develop a culture in communities where you typically wouldn't expect to find it. I think it's safe to say that most architecture isn't very good, and most good architecture is good enough for most days. But there is some architecture, some buildings that should rise above the everyday. In many ways, I see our task as the task of recreating strangeness, of developing a connection to our place that is singular and yet simultaneously universal, simultaneously local, and yet having a global presence.
Marlon, thank you so much.
Now it's on. I think I actually turned it off when I came up here. Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you, David. Appreciate the welcome and the introduction. It's great to be here. Been looking forward to this for some time. It's great to be back in Indiana. And I'll share a little bit of that with you in a bit. But this lecture, which is entitled Radical Practice, was actually for some time been titled Abstract Unions. And I think it's worthwhile to return to that just for a moment, as those words encompass really our approach and really help address the question of practice versus theory, of engagement versus detachment, and the question of form. And frankly, most of our work is in a place where detachment isn't even really an option, even if we wanted it to be. Rather than a removal from reality, abstraction for us is the process of connecting to place, of looking for possibilities of maximum meaning with minimal means. We like to say using an economy of means for a maximum of meaning. So we attempt to demonstrate how ideas of reinterpreting the familiar are generated from careful observations of intersections of nature-made and culture-made conditions that are particular to an architectural situation. So our practice, along with my partner in the firm and my partner in life, A.T. Blackwell, as the film noted, we're located in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And it's a place of deep pragmatism and authenticity, and a place of real natural beauty and real constructed ugliness. I would say that Arkansas and Indiana have a lot in common in some ways. Good and not so good. That's okay. It's everywhere. But inclusively, these conditions I just referenced are both sources of inspiration and offer profound possibilities for hybridization and abstraction, a deep well of ideas that we have returned to again and again. So the title Radical Practice is also the title of our new monograph by Princeton Architectural Press. And we're really excited about this monograph. We decided it to calibrate its weight to be the same as that of a human head, about 7 pounds. So if you don't like it, it also makes a great doorstop as well. So we believe in creating value in everything that we make. You know, again, I was telling students earlier this morning, you've created value when 1 + 1 = 5. So you do 5 things with 1 thing. But people often ask, Arkansas, radical practice, what's wrong? What's the disconnect here? But I like to say, rather than the popular understanding of the adjective radical as like extreme, or in architectural history as like the avant-garde, our use of radical is really founded in the lesser known understanding of the adjective, that is to say, fundamentals, or proceeding from fundamentals, or relating to roots, or relating to origins. So it's fundamentals, it's roots, it's origins, it's returning to that and understanding that as a means of practice. And so from this perspective, the focus on roots, fundamentals, and origins, there is first and foremost a core principle in the heart of our practice, radical in its fundamental simplicity, at least for today. And the assertion is simply the making of buildings and places as a constant and authentic focus. Buildings and places and buildings. And embedded in this assertion, however, is the proposition that architecture must possess more than projective or speculative character, that architecture fundamentally requires material substance, tectonic construction, and lived experience, and that on those terms, architecture, just as fundamentally, even imperatively, is located, situated, and placed in the world, and born of the specificities of place. These fundamental propositions underwrite our deceptively simple, radical practice, as a practice, therefore, of materiality, construction, and experience, and of deep attentiveness to the qualities and necessities of the place in which it is situated. All of this is to take on the issues particular to the advancement, the development, and the enrichment of place. So through the work we do, we not only celebrate the capacity of architecture to overcome oppressive and repressive circumstances with conditional optimism, but rather also indict the conditions that so often require us to affirm our own humanity and possible future through the deep possibilities inherent in practicing in the places we build. In the American South, and where I practice in Arkansas, one of the poorest states in the country, to make an architecture of what I like to call placeness, it is necessary for us to embrace everything, even the bad things, so that we can understand them and incorporate them in who we are and what an architecture in the place, of the place, and for the place can be, and at times slightly out of place. Place is the canvas, architecture the medium, nature and culture the shapers. Placeness, manifested by dignified and felt architecture, offers citizens a journey of engagement, wonder, and possibility that gives new identities to context through a productive tension between the local and the universal, the global, or what we like to call the glocal. The glocal condition, in fact, is the operative reality of the world, and that is what we are operating in. So what you see here is our office in Fayetteville, an office that, like many of our projects, we take what the world gives to us and then we represent it on our terms. And in this case, an old mercantile building, and at $69 a square foot, we totally transformed the building inside and out using paint and a love of windows. We took every window opening existing in this facade and replaced it with windows we love. Yes, we stole a few windows. Thank you, Marcel Breuer. Thank you, Seeger Leveritz, and we go on and on. But it is the love of even the most smallest yet significant elements of architecture that also inform these much larger ideas, both formal and spatial. Now, much of what we do, and I think much of what we do as a profession, is take what we already have and try to provide the past with the future, right? It's a transformation story. And it's probably, I think, one of the most sustainable things we can do, right? It's to take what we have, find new possibilities. And so I'm reminded of a story that happened in Fayetteville post-war. There was a family in Fayetteville by the name of Fulbright. You may have heard of William J. Fulbright, the senator. The Fulbright family also owned a mill in Fayetteville. And they used local white oak, and they made farm implements, plowshares, wagon wheels, axe handles, and such. And they had begun to build up an inventory after the war. The demand had dropped. Now, simultaneously, a very well-known architect who grew up in Fayetteville was a friend of Mr. Fulbright's, but he's now an internationally known architect based in New York, and his name is Edward Durrell Stowe. And he is building the country's first fine arts complex on a university campus at the University of Arkansas. And so Mr. Fulbright goes and sees his friend Ed. He says, Ed, you're creative. You're a very creative person. I've got all this inventory built up. What do you think we could do with it? And so he said, well, give me a chance to think about it, and I'll come back to you. And so a few weeks later, he came back, and I said, my idea is that we take these tools, and we modify them, we repurpose them, and we turn them into an international line of furniture. So I can populate my new fine arts complex, and you can start a new furniture business. And so wagon wheels became stools, plow handles became these beautiful chairs, and big plowshares became these beautiful chase lounges, using the traditional craft of Ozark basket weaving made from stripped white oak bark. And so, wow, immediate impact to the business as well as to this new complex, and had a significance in its place, right? But today, and I just went there, I just got back from New York, I came from here from New York. You will see these very same furniture in the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum in New York. So its impact can be more universal, more global, beyond its place, the global. So this productive tension between the local and the global is critical in some ways to the work that we do. So the new develops out of the old, however, it is changed in the light of the new. So one of these projects that I said really illustrates this, I'll show you in just a minute, but I'm reminded that we're often working between the ideal and the improvised in our discipline. And I don't see that as a plus or a minus or a negative and a positive. I just see it as conditions in which we try to not resolve one to the other, but to try to create resonance between these conditions, to draw inspiration in an inclusive way in terms of how we design and what our sources for inspiration are. And abstraction is an important thing. You know, that intersection of culture and nature, or in this case, culture and agriculture, you know, produces some pretty interesting connections, at sometimes juxtapositions. One of my favorite paintings, Mondrian with cows. I love the title. And the cows just don't give a damn. But in some ways, there is something subversive about this as well, even to the whole history of painting. So not all of our projects come with cows, but in this case, it does. So this is a small church in Springdale, Arkansas. It's an Eastern Orthodox Christian church. They were worshiping in a rundown office building in Springdale. And it's a very aestheticized form of worship and rituals and icons and such. And they wanted something much more dignified. And one of their parishioners died, left them some money, and they went out next to a city park along the interstate and bought 3.5 acres of land. And then with the money they had over, they wanted to build a sanctuary and a fellowship hall. And so they came to us and they said, we've got about $100 a square foot that we could spend on this church. Even 10 years ago, that was nothing. And we're like, well, okay. And then they showed me a picture and said, and we'd like to build this if we could. I said, sure, if we could just make it out of cardboard and, you know, prop it up. And they said, no. I said, you don't have the money for that. He says, well, then could you do this? Could you take this metal shed, this welding shed that's on the property, and turn that into the church? And I said, oh, you mean like tear it down and build on the footprint? And they went, no, this is all we got. We don't think you can afford that. So naturally our hearts sank, and we were somewhat sad. But then we said, well, look, we got to make this happen. So we got to thinking about, well, what could we do that wouldn't cost a lot of money that as architects we should be able to do? Well, proportion and scale are free. They don't cost anything. So we went back to the origins and we started studying Greek proportioning systems to go with the origins of the Greek Orthodox Church. And we discovered some very interesting things, and I said, well, we can reconfigure this building into something using golden mean and such in all of its constituent parts and formal figure. And we just used a simple box rib metal system off the rack. We customized the transition details, the corners and the eaves and the edges to give a kind of transitions that we want, this sort of abstraction in a sense. All the colors are there, all the icons, and then we always add a little bit of Corbusier, because I believe everything goes better with a little bit of Corb, so we got this great little canopy there. And you have this sacred visage, even a billboard-like, facing the interstate. And how did we do it? Well, we just left the metal building as it was, and we wrapped it in a new studs and metal skin. We added 10 feet to the front to create a narthex, so when you come in, you're presented with St. Nicholas, their patron saint. You turn left, you then get on axes below the steeple, east-west axes into the sanctuary. The walls open up for overflow into the fellowship hall, so we have double use there, and it's very straightforward. And we just took ordinary systems and we coursed them to place the windows exactly where they needed to be, the doors where they need to be. Everything is coursed into these ribs, and so they just sort of disappear. So just through the simple act of craft and precision, we can elevate something rather ordinary as a system, but as ultimately to the status of architecture. You can see the concrete pad there actually identifies where the fire exit door is. Now, one of the things they wanted obviously was natural light, so we cut one window into the east elevation to get morning light. The iconostasis is made out of bar stock angles. Of course, it's all covered in icons now, but they wanted a dome. They wanted to put a dome on top of the building, like that first photo. And I said, well, you can't do that. We've got superstructure with a pre-engineered building. I said, well, we can put it in the plenum. I said, sure. So we spec'd them a dome, and they came back and said, we just don't have the money for that. We're in construction. We're running out of money. The contractor said, I don't think I could build one because to the standards you'd want. I said, well, what are we going to do? And he says, well, let me go check around. I'll come back to you. So he came back a few days later, and he said, hey, I've got this friend of mine. He's a metal worker. He's like a hermit. He lives out in the mountains in the Ozarks there, 20 miles away. And he said he loves beer. And he said if we give him a couple cases of beer, he'll give us this satellite dish that he's got. And so that's what we did. We took the satellite dish, in the middle of construction, we trucked it back onto the site, we skim coated it in plaster, jacked it up on a scissor lift, and we have our dome. So that's how we roll in Arkansas. And I was really excited about it because I could tell Father John, you have a direct access to God now. And he pointed out, yes, but it's pointed in the wrong direction. So I was like, oh yeah. So, one of the building committee members says, yeah, and I know where we could get a throne for the bishop when he comes to bless the church when it opens. And it's all made out of walnut, and it's got crushed purple velvet upholstery. And I can get it for free. And I said, really, where? And he goes, well, it's part of an ad campaign at the local liquor store. He said, they said I could have it when they're done. And I said, okay, that sounds cool. He goes, I just don't know what we're going to do with the embroidered CR on it. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, Crown Royal. And I was like, oh. And then Father John overheard us, and he walked over, and he said, no, Christ the Redeemer, go get the chair. So that's how it goes. So 2013, we got a call from the American Institute of Honor, their awards program, to tell us that it had won an Institute Honor Award. But the kicker was they said, we were looking at the budget and how small it was for this. We went back and did our research, and we discovered that in the history of this awards program, this is the least expensive building to ever win an Institute Honor Award. So it really underscored what I was trying to say in the little film here is that architecture can happen anywhere, at any scale, at any budget, right? And for anyone. It isn't just reserved for the few, it's for everyone, and everyone should have access to it. And any project can be architecture. So we're often looking at how we take the ordinary and the local and make it somewhat extraordinary, let it inform even the most honorific of projects. We're currently working on a whole health institute at the Crystal Bridges Museum campus in Bentonville, Arkansas. This is a national institute that is really about life management, well-being, preventative health, rather than, we do really great with treatment, but we're not so good about not getting sick. So this is really what this is about, along with Art Bridges, which is a whole national organization about getting art into communities where you'd least expect to find it, and as well exchanged with museums. And we were inspired by these little churches in the Ozarks that we call them giraffe churches. And so they are basically fieldstone that's just collected around the site and then laid up into this cladding system in just whatever way you can find them. And so we're using that as a way to make this 19-foot tall base of this new Whole Health Institute and extracting it on our own basis here. So we're actually making a cave and taking the stone of our place to make this base on which sits the forest in this beautiful curved brise-soleil east and west. And it wraps itself around the curve of a ravine. And so this is all big event lawn. So it's an extended threshold into the museum campus as well. Now, rather than using wood here, we're using actually pre-weathered brass that has its spangle in the light and is much more durable, let's say, than putting a wood. But it's all it's controlled is passively with the light on the east, the brise-soleils on the east and west. And you can begin to see it in the plan of how it begins to wrap itself very subtly around the terrain. So it's really being shaped by nature. It's called the flow. And it's really an intersection of architecture, art, health, and nature all together. And so embedded in the building itself is art and becomes part of an exhibit, both inside and outside. It has exhibition spaces as well as event spaces, consulting offices, and the such. On the inside is the appearance of the forest itself. So we actually are CNC milling local pecan to become this canopy that acts as a datum that organizes everything on the ground floor and on the upper two floors as well. And then that is contrasted with the stone of the floors. Again, back to the cave and the forest as a meme. So it's currently under construction. It's one of the, I think, largest buildings we've done. It's really exciting and will be completed in July of 24. So very excited about this project, but it starts from very humble beginnings. Now, I wanted to share this project with you. I haven't shown the project in a while, but I'm back to Indiana, and I have to say, our first national project happened in Indiana at the Indianapolis Museum of Art, now called Newfields, I believe. And it really was an exercise at looking at the intersection of what is nature-made and what is culture-made, looking for the patterns that connect. It was a great process working with Mary Miss, an environmental artist, and Ed Blake of the Landscape Studio. We worked on this for 4 or 5 years, which is the 100 Acres Art and Nature Park, an experiential center, as well as an interpretive or visitors pavilion, the Ruth Lilly Visitors Pavilion. And it's a project where the museum, they took a risk on a relatively unknown firm to kind of bring this into reality. Now, it happened in the middle of the recession, the Great Recession, so many aspects of it did not get built. But the park, landscape-wise, did, as well as this one building, the Ruth Lilly Pavilion you see here. And you might be familiar with it, but you know that the campus of IMA is located in the Oxbow, or in the bend of the White River, and the canal that runs to Broad Ripple, it's kind of 10 acres of canal in Indianapolis. So it makes it, in effect, a kind of an island for this 100-acre art and nature park. And that used to be forest, and then it became pasture for the farmer, and then they quarried it to build the interstate through Indianapolis, all the limestone out of it, and made a huge quarry pit that filled up with water, and is now an amenity with fish and such, in the city itself. And one of the things that has come about in the last 15, 20 years is that it floods a lot. So indiscriminate development upriver has actually agitated this to where I think there have been 3 100-year floods in the last 7 or 8 years, 10 years or so. And so it breaches the banks, the river does, into the lake, and really turns the entire site into one big floodway. Out of the 100 acres, there are only 0.64 acres available to build on. So it's very easy to find our site. The rest of it is all in a floodway. And this is our site. And it's a wet, fecund site. You can see it with water. So our challenge was to build this interpretive center where it could begin to deal with the issues of water, that volatile situation between water and land. And our landscape architect had a brilliant idea. which is rather than stick it up in pilote, because it would have to be 5 feet in the air, right at eye level, he says, let us build some berms and channels, and it'll float and straddle those and float above, and then channel the water underneath it and around it when it rains. And then we'll make these little figures that point towards little views will cut through the forest. And that was really quite exciting. And so this is what we did. And so that it just rises up very gently. The path becomes a ramp, which becomes a deck, which wraps up and becomes a canopy. Our attempt to do one material, one detail in the carapace of this. Now, we often, like I say, look at nature, look at what we find. And the leaf you see there, I kept finding these along the river, on the White River, and they had been eaten away by insects. And the structure is left in place, but it has a very porous surface. It reminded me of the canopy of trees, just walking in the forest. And it's highly ventilated, and so water comes through it, air comes through it, and light comes through it. And I thought, what if we could make a building that had this kind of porosity as well, but actually would be really strong? And so working with Guy Nordenson, a really renowned structural engineer out of New York, we developed an exoskeleton that basically puts you in contact with this beautiful hardwood screen of wood, which is the canopy and the deck and all, and then the presence of the structure, which is quite robust, but appears very light because it's only manifested particularly through its shadow, and that shadow is constantly changing. If you're on there on a sunny day and a cloud goes by, everything goes quiet and then it all comes back on. So it pulses with the rhythms of the day and the seasons. It's been imbued with what Wright, I think, often talked about, was imbued with the order of change, right? And that's something that I think is quite powerful, and this is it today. And we began to pleat openings, so we wanted more rain to come through or snow, whatever. When the workers were working on this, it would rain in a parallelogram and be shaped by that, and they would just stop working and just enjoy this phenomenon to it. Totally unintended. I wish I could say that we dreamed that up, but we didn't. Oh, that's a repeat. Oh dear. Here we go. That's what I was trying to get to. So this kind of gives you some idea. So on the deck, that spacing, so we had to meet code. We infilled with 1x2 acrylic bars, right? So you could walk on it, but you'll see the individual pieces, and then we lit it up at night. And so you kind of get this sort of wonderful dapple light. So it really becomes this kind of visage in the forest, this apparition almost, you could say. And then, of course, the two volumes, the glass volume, which you come and relax in, and then the service volume with the bathrooms and offices and such. And the inside and the outside are much the same, because then the glass goes over the top. So what we're doing is really inverting things to get this inside-outside relationship. And you begin to see how it situates itself in this carapace, this wrapper with the insertion of this burnt wood black box, so that's all a burned cedar. And I understand a phenomenon has kind of emerged around this building, and this has happened right after it's opened, but has been going on since, I just discovered. People come here to make engagements. So couples will come here and they get in this interstitial zone between the wrapper and the glass box, and there's something kind of magical, either light-wise or feeling-wise, and people are proposing to people in there. So if you're not interested in getting married or anything, do not go near that. I don't know if it's willful or not. It could just be compulsive, whatever. And it's pretty cool in the snow as well. So anyways, this, on a side note, was awarded in 2012 the AIA Institute Honor Award. It's the first AIA Institute Honor Award for the city of Indianapolis. So it just demonstrates that there can be great within the small. So what I just showed you was a transformation in some ways of a landscape, right? In the same way, we've been looking at that scale of transformation in other landscapes. We worked on the largest urban park in America, a 4,500-acre urban park in Memphis, Tennessee, that we did with field operations. James Corner, if you know the High Line in New York, you'll know their work. They had already been working on this park for a while. We were brought in into the heart of the park. There are 200 acres in the heart to reimagine this expanded lake and the activities and programs that could happen along that. The park had a problem. It did not reflect the socioeconomic and racial diversity in its audience of folks that came there. It did not have a strong identity, and it operated in the red. It was in 501c, but it was always struggling financially. And so they thought if we could reprogram to make it more welcoming, that we could have our buildings that generated their own revenue streams and really activate the heart of the park, that might revitalize this landscape and the park itself. And it has a rather tortured history. You see the bridge going from Arkansas into Memphis. That's downtown Memphis, the birthplace of rock and roll, great barbecue, all of these things. The same time all this is happening in the 40s and 50s, on the opposite side of Memphis, where we're at on the east side, is a prison farm. And this is a 4,500 acre prison farm that's run by prisoners. They grow crops there, they have blue ribbon cattle. They basically sustain themselves for what they grow, and then they sell it off to the county, what they can't use. So that lasted from the 20s to the 70s. And when it was no longer accepted as an acceptable form of rehabilitation, they turned it back over. They closed it and turned it back over to the county, who could not manage this. In fact, speculators and developers swept in to turn it all into acres and acres of tract housing. The citizens there rose up. They said, no, this could be a park. We need a park on this side of Memphis. And so that's what happened, is it really transformed from this penal farm into a park in the 1970s. And then to bring you up to date, there's the heart of the park, and then this idea that they could begin to situate programs around that edge. And so we're really invited to develop a family of figures, an ensemble of similar language of architecture, right? But it had to do something that we weren't quite prepared to do when we first came to the site. And what we noticed is that wherever there were shade, there were people. No shade, no people. A picnic table 30 feet away in the sun, there's nobody there. And we knew these buildings are situated in existing pastures around the lake. They would have to generate their own shade, up at least until the 1 million trees that had been planted throughout the park could begin to take root and create their own canopies, which takes time. Parks are never produced, they're always evolved over time. So every building creates its own shade. And we also went back and looked at ideas about shade and ideas about breezeways and such with the vernacular things like the dog trot house, again, back to origins, to develop our first building, a 8,000 square foot visitor center with an 8,000 square foot porch. So it's all made out of aluminum bar grate. Typically the bar grate you walk on, we discovered a way to connect it to a superstructure to make its own cladding system. It's pre-manufactured in 2 foot wide, 4 foot wide panels. So we basically made this ephemeral kind of diaphanous envelope, and also using third growth cypress trees as well. And then these extended breezeways into the landscape for cooling breezes, and it takes you through with these unobstructed views of the landscape, a 32-foot cantilevered porch, all ventilated by 5 20-foot big-ass fans, which that's the brand name. That's not me coming up with it. And Memphis is like a lot of places in the South. You can be in the shade, but you're still going to sweat. So by ventilating that shade, by using nature as an analog, we can cool that. That's year-round used for yoga, used for receptions, used for all kinds of activities, creates another revenue stream. And you can begin to see, too, that it, too, is very responsive to the light. In the morning, it's pink. In the afternoon, it may become more of the blue-silver. In the evening, a spectrum of orange or wherever the sun sets. It's always in tune with the light and beautifully situated in the landscape. This is a kind of real collaboration with field operations ourselves, trying to situate this properly. And other figures like picnic pavilions that we call the crickets. And they're shade pavilions, but this is where people have their family reunions. They book them out for months at a time. And those are around the park. And it's really about the spaces between the boathouse with the kayaks and the canoes and the concessions as well. Simple figure, simple palette, again, using that aluminum bar grate, along with zinc-like metal panels and concrete block in this case. The stage pavilion serves the event lawn, but also the events that take place on the lake. And when it's not being used, then it's a shade pavilion in and of itself, right? So we're always creating double reciprocal uses that we can. And then the final building is a conference center and restaurant retreat. And we work directly with Kimball Musk, and Elon Musk, his brother, who has a farm-to-table series of restaurants. This was the first ground-up restaurant called The Kitchen. And its identifying feature is an 80-foot deep porch. There's more seating outside than inside that sweeps in low to knock down the western sun and set up these beautiful sunset views. So this opened in 2016. It's been a huge hit for the thing. Attendance has increased by over 50%. The diversity has increased by over 100%. People actually feel welcome to come here. And it's operated in the black every year since it's been open. So it underscores, again, the possibility for architecture, and I say that in the umbrella, architecture, landscape, interiors, all of that, to strengthen institutions and to be a transformative agent. Now, the impact on community can't be, I think, noted enough that we can have through design, but through it being attentive not just to the needs of the community, but to their stories, to their aspirations. We've just finished a project in Detroit, Michigan. This is for the Kresge Foundation. It's located in the McNichols-Livermore neighborhood in 6 Mile in Detroit, traditional African-American neighborhood that is also the home to Marygrove College, which, as you may or may not know, has basically failed. I mean, through attrition, enrollment, financial difficulty, it had to close. And so rather than and that was in many ways the kind of backbone of this community and great pride. And so what happened was the Kresge Foundation came in and is repurposing the whole campus into a cradle-to-career campus. From prenatal all the way to 20 years old, you can go to school here, up to 1,000 students, and get a great formative education and then continue that education. Education is the key to our cities, to revitalizing our cities. All the hipsters are moving to Detroit, and they're all moving out as soon as they have kids because of the education systems and the models. So they need alternative models. This is a national alternative model. It's the Marygrove Early Childhood Learning Center for prenatal to kindergarten. And this is a building that we were asked to do. You know, you don't just kind of come into neighborhoods when you're from the outside. You need people with street creds to really have that community activity. We didn't get to do that, but we had great people that did do it, and one of them being the Dean of Detroit Mercy, Dan Patera, came in and did the community engagement, got the stories, got the aspirations, came to us. We had to read the tea leaves and curate this and begin to put it forward. It's a one-story building. It had to be one story, 25,000 square feet. So it's a mat building. And one of the big issues was nature. So many of the kids grow up in a context of emptiness and even blight. And by having the opportunity to come to school every day and be surrounded by nature was really important. So every classroom is contingent and adjacent to a courtyard here. These courtyards bring in light. They create places for play and also for learning as well. And that was one of the big things we wanted to do. You can see the neighborhood and all the fabric of these single tiny homes here, right? And this big, really civic presence of the Marygrove College and how we're situated in this campus. Now, what really key to them, this is all collegiate Gothic with Indiana limestone, just want to say. Got a big plug for Indiana limestone. So we were challenged to do to come up and clad this building with a material that was just as resilient and durable. They wanted it to look just as good the day it opened, or 50 years from now as the day it opened. And that was different, but they were willing to invest in that, the Kresge Foundation. So, and then they challenged us, the community challenged us, and then Wendy L. Jackson, the vice director of Kresge, challenged us, says, we do not want a building that looks just like this limestone buildings, these old buildings that represent something else to our community. We do not want a monochromatic building, brick or copper. We want polychroma. We want to demonstrate our diversity and inclusiveness that we're available to everyone. And it's representational, but it's also important, but it has to be durable. So what we came up with was glazed terracotta rain screen panels that are ribbed. And we developed a whole palette of colors, each color costing money. So the base colors had to work with the existing buildings, and then the accent colors had to really pop and really create this wonderful palette. And so we did 150 different permutations before we came up with the one that was acceptable. Now, the whole time I'm thinking, what we're really doing is cladding this building in a coat of many colors. And I was reminded of that song, but I was also reminded of being with the quilt ladies in Gee's Bend, Alabama. And Wendy L. Jackson had also been there too. And we shared a love for these quilts because they're made out of discarded rags. And in this remote part of Alabama, this whole co-op of women whose husbands were off in the war are there taking these rags, repurposing these rags into items of great use, right, and also great beauty, which are now on exhibit in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So I actually went down there and just visited and just drew some more inspiration from being with the Petway family. It's mostly Petways that are there in the co-op, and came back and we got this together, and it works. It works. The students identify with this, the families identify with it. It comes alive. And we gather light from the side, from above, from the front, in any way we can to help articulate this envelope in these volumetric windows. And, you know, very simple, graceful entrance. It just sort of folds back and welcomes you in. And the first thing you come into is a lobby filled with a courtyard in space here. So you can see all the way through the courtyard to the other side of the building into the grove of trees. So this connection with nature becomes very present. And again, every space is connected to this. So you have places for the staff, for the children, again, for play, for solitude, for socialization. Every classroom has direct connection to the outside, which is really critical to the learning environment here. And it really is active. I was just there about 3 or 4 months ago, and it's a buzz. The only word I can think of is joy, what you see in the children and in the teachers and the staff that are working there, and in the families. Every space, even the circulation spaces, are places for program and education and learning. Reading nooks, small little libraries, things of that nature all become activated. Places to commune. And community spaces as well for local organizations. There's a coffee shop for families. So you don't just come and drop your kids off. You can come and hang out. You can have a community organization. So it really becomes a center, and that's what a lot of these early childhood learning centers are thinking about what they can do. It's like rethinking the library. It's rethinking early childhood education. That isn't just about the children, it's also about the families as well. And all of these are lit from above with these lanterns here. And the courtyards spill out into this beautiful grove of trees. Margie Ruddock, our landscape architect, developed a wonderful playscape and learningscape woven through this grove of trees that really creates a whole nother kind of character to the building along the south side with its extensive shaded porch in each of those classrooms expressed. And so it really has made a major impact in this community here. It's become not only a local presence, but it's now become more of a national presence, a national model for early childhood learning. I went back last year with my family to Gee's Bend. I happened to be in Alabama visiting. We stopped in, we saw Mary Ann Petway, and I'd just taken some pictures with my phone. And I said, hey, look what we came up with, just inspired by your quilts. And she looked at the photos and she looked at me with a twinkle in her eye and she says, and you've given me an idea for a quilt. So that's kind of how it works, right? It all comes back around. So in many ways, it's about what we're trying to do and what we can do, even with the most ordinary of systems or materials, is to ennoble the prosaic. And we're currently working on a project in Fort Worth with a developer I met in Detroit. His name is Philip Kafka. He has Prince Concepts. And he's been working with this principle of how do I develop urban vitality in a context of emptiness. And he's been using the simple system of the Quonset hut. Now, typically when you see a Quonset hut, it's located out in an agricultural setting as a singular figure against the horizon, right? Or maybe in an urban thing, you might see an industrialized. What he's doing is he's been buying up land near downtown Detroit called Core City, 1 million square feet of land he's bought. There are 6 functioning houses in 1 million square feet of land. That's how barren this is. He's been developing these compounds using the Quonset to create density. And he's just finished one called the Caterpillar. You might have seen it in Arc Record, 250-foot long, again, housing deal. And then around that, he will take old parking lots, turn them into plazas, take a radiator shop, take a food truck chef, give him a place to have a chef, and then a bakery pops up, and then offices, and then another little business. And so these pockets of vitality with these collateral economies begin to jump up around the idea of public space as a generator, right? So we're currently working on a project in Fort Worth, a mixed-use development in an emerging neighborhood in Fort Worth called PS 1200. And it's got housing, as you can see here, in these double-story high that sit on the base of concrete block offices down below. And then along the street, there's a restaurant called the Spiral Diner, and then a grab-and-go, and a small gallery bookstore. And then in between is a public plaza designed by Julie Barkman of Dirt. And so this is all coming together, and we're just using the Quonset as structure in the vertical direction. But in the horizontal direction, we're flipping it on its side to develop it as cladding, and so it has a consistent vocabulary or palette throughout the development. And not too far away is that museum I think we all love, if we love museums and we love Con, is the Kimball Art Museum, about 1.5 miles away. And, you know, we obviously were inspired by this incredible structure in what we're doing. But we did our research too and discovered that Kahn was actually looking for his inspiration at the stockyards in Fort Worth that I'm showing up here in this upper photograph. So his own attempt to ennoble the prosaic is manifested in the Kimball. Our attempt too is to ennoble it in our own way with this simple Quonset system. And it's pretty straightforward. Once you get the base built, these actually go up in about a day, the shells of them. And in the alleyway, we cantilever them out to create shade and stuff for the porches and stuff for the apartments up above. Along the west side, the alleyway. You enter between them, the stairs, and then this simple spaces. There's just one service core with the bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, all made out of maple plywood, and then the rest of it's just this nice big double space. And this is it today, and then we take the system, we modify the corners where we need to create this kind of hybridized windows and such to really activate the street edge. So we're really getting reinvested back into elements, so the elements become a feature as well within the system. We don't just take what they give to us. And this is it about a month or so ago, although they're now putting in the landscape. So Julie Barkman's landscape is a primordial-like landscape. We're taking stone and cracking, and the grass grows between. She's using pond cypress and Italian cypress, just 2 trees. But rather than make them walls of landscape, as they're traditionally used, she's turning them into jazz. She's plopping them around just almost like a musical score as they kind of pop all through this land. And she's planting them next to the buildings as they curve around the canopies when they grow. So she's enmeshing all of this urban condition into a forest that will happen over time. And really, really excited about where the project's going. This kind of prosaic system of the Quonset combined with this emerging forest in the middle of the city. So in that line of thinking, it's about the particulars of place. And we've just got a building that's just about done where we take a particular of the culture of the place, Bentonville, Arkansas, which is the capital of mountain biking in the United States. And we're working with Michelle Rochkin and Christian Callahan and Aruka Aruchi and our team at NBA to develop, as they bill it, the world's first bikeable building. So it's a 200,000 square foot office building in downtown Bentonville. It was supposed to be WeWork's first ground up building. They imploded, as you know, during the pandemic. Michelle, who was head of their architecture department, everybody was sort of let go, so we formed this team. Michelle is a very prominent Mexican architect and ourselves, so we had 2 designers working on this. It's an interesting collaboration. He said, you know, if it's a successful collaboration, if this thing looks like you or looks like me when we're done, then we failed. So we have really created something that's pretty different than what either of us do. But you can literally take the public space of the sidewalk and it moves up the side of the building, and then of course the building steps back and creates a scaled recession from the street edge. So this 6-story building feels much smaller. And then on the terraces, the cantilever terraces, those are public too, and they're activated with programs. And the exterior, the activity, the mobility, the idea of wellness, all of that in this co-working area inscribes itself on the interior and really energizes the interior spaces as well. It really becomes an environment as such. And of course, just some of it under construction here, and just the different ramps. It's all set to where you can walk up, wheelchair, it's 1 to 20, and you can bike up. It's a 3/4 of a mile long ramp, which is the same distance that it is from the town square. So you get some good exercise, break a sweat before you even get to your office, right? And this is, we're going to be completed the core and shell in about 2 weeks. And then Christian and Aruk are doing all the tenant fit out for the interior. So an exciting project in the middle of nowhere. So I think to keep that in mind. All right, I'm going to end with this. You all been very patient. And I extended this talk. This is a 45-minute. I extended because I wanted to give you guys everything I got today. So, because y'all are worth it. So we've been working on a school. We talked a lot about today with the students about curriculum and about educational models and pedagogy and that sort of thing. I think the pedagogy and the curriculum of an architecture school is the way you really need to learn. It's through making, through project-based scenarios, abstract thinking, but also very pragmatic thinking. It's a very lively form of education that doesn't rely just on regurgitation of information. And so we're just finished last year a maker school in Bentonville. The woman that you see here, how many have heard of Amelia Earhart? Okay. Well, this is Louise Thaden, her friend. Louise grew up in Bentonville. She learned to fly flying through barns. She was a pioneer in aviation as well. And in fact, if you look up the Bindex cross-country air race, she won it not once but twice and set the record when she and Amelia Earhart were told they were not allowed to enter because it was all male. They did it anyway, and they won. And she won in particular. So she is the muse for the Thaden School, this project-based learning maker school in Bentonville, Arkansas. And it has 3 signature programs that were developed by the headmaster who they recruited from Princeton University to come here and start with his family, develop, I should say, a curriculum. And simultaneously with this curriculum, our design team, MBA, SQ Dumas Ripple out of New Orleans, and Andrew Pogon, the landscape architects, we are manifesting in real time that curriculum through architecture. So it's a curriculum, again, based in making and analogous sort of relationships with learning. So each student gets a bike, they learn how to work on bikes, they learn how to bike, they learn how to fabricate bikes, fix bikes, everything about bikes, right? Bentonville, right? Then there are meals. So they have productive landscapes, they learn to grow food, prepare food, cook food, they have teaching kitchens, that sort of thing. And then there is reels, which is they learn to tell stories through animation and film. If you're ever familiar with the AIA Film Challenge, now this is 6th through 12th grade. And by the way, anybody can go here. So the tuition is all based on what your family makes. So some students are paying $500 a year and some $25,000 a year. It is also an open campus. There is no fence around the campus. It is part of the community. It is, you can walk through it. It's just part of the community. It's like a big park. So the AIA Film Challenge, on that, 6th through 12th graders, they had 2 teams that were in the finals 2 years ago. So they're onto something there. So It's located eight blocks from the downtown square in Bentonville, 30-acre site on the old county fairgrounds. It isn't an urban site, even though it's in the town. We call it urban pastoral. So much of these sorts of sites were once agricultural and such. And so we're looking not at the Noli map or something, we're looking at chicken sheds and farm groupings and barns and such to develop a master plan that takes some of the common sense arrangement of buildings east-west to control sun, but really developing the spaces between, right, to be educational spaces and to be spaces, as you can see in the diagrams, that deal with indigenous plants, the Osage prairie, deal with circulation, with water management. It actually has even a water lab, a learning lab on it as well. And deals with like the geography, the MEMA mounds that you find in the prairies, a geothermal, community geothermal. So all of these things are brought together as a learning scape. And so the students are observing these processes as well as part of their learning, right? So every space on this campus is essentially a classroom. This is what we came up with, our team did. Simple palette of materials, box rib metal system with plywood ceilings and RFC base, like concrete rain screen panels on certain aspects of it. And then some wood on some of the buildings, like the home building and the bike barn. So a host of buildings here: wheels, reels, meals, home, bike barn. So I'm just going to go through a couple of these. The home building is S.Q. Dumez's building, and the others are ours. So the reels building here. So these are all single-story buildings, and we're employing this idea of pitching and rolling the roofs to create diversity and dissimilarity in every classroom. So every classroom has its own character, which is completely opposite of the way I grew up, in this kind of numbingly instrumental, systemic classrooms. Everybody's the same. It's like, am I in prison? Am I, where am I? So different attitude about dissimilarity and variety. But also the folding of the roof allows you to get light in the middle of it as well, daylighting. We wanted to make it very particular to its place, so we started working with Sherwin-Williams and PPG, which has all the codes to every car, every minute, all the color codes. We also studied about Dale Jeffries, who basically invented the use of metal flake in sports cars and race cars in the 50s and 60s. So Sherwin-Williams has started this program where if you use a lot of metal, you can customize the color. So again, nature-made, culture-made, we start looking at machines and cars, and in particular a 67 Shelby GT, green gold, and then looking at Osage prairie grasses and trying to find a relationship between those two, and then lots of gold metal flake. To get the flip-flop in the surface, right? So it gets very dynamic. And so we developed an own custom color that really works and unifies the building at times with the landscape itself. And so you can begin to see how these things come together, and then how they come together in time. So it really becomes, again, this idea of the order of change. And we've been working with different car codes. We're now working on a building with custom camo with Sherwin-Williams, so a more biophilic deal. But we cut through these linear buildings, these breezeways, which are places of transition, but really outdoor classrooms, if you think about it, and we bring light down into the middle of that, all plywood. And you can see the most social space in it is the hallway, which is inflected to kind of reduce the kind of straight shot. Daylight from above. Every classroom, I could say, is different. It has direct connection to the outside. And then the building, because it can shift and change and move through the roof, it can scale itself to where it needs to be on the site. In this case, we're coming up on the local boulevard that runs by it. So the faces west, it has the Brise Soleil, also controls the acoustics, and inside is the student lounge. The next building is the Wheels building. We like to call it its double first cousin, because they have share the same palette and the box rib metal. I know everybody's scratching their head, what in the double first cousin? If you're from Arkansas, you know what that is. But anyways, so here we had to engage with Main Street. That was part of the requirements. And by the way, this is a design excellence program. that was based on the Miller's family's Design Excellence program in Columbus. So the Walton family actually got together with the Millers and used that as a stepping stone to understand how to make their own Design Excellence program. So this is one of the first buildings to be part of that. So we developed this porch that's basically blocking the western sun, filtering that. It creates a space along there. We have the productive landscapes along the south. On the inside, these really beautiful spaces for robotics and fabrication, wood shop, bike shop, and then even in the hallways, these are project labs, and those, what's made is presented in these columns as are also vitrines. And you can see they have a program, a community engagement program on Saturdays. These doors open up, students come out, and they work on people's bikes in the community. They can bring them by, and they'll work on it. So it's a great service learning component here that they learn. And so there is something about self-reliance that's a big part of this. If you've ever read Emerson's Self-Reliance, you'll understand the Ozarks and this kind of deep, authentic pragmatism where we come from that this capitalizes on. If you see beyond, they also have a performance education building. So for, again, for theater performance, for music, for drama. This is a project that I designed while I was at the American Academy in Rome about 3 years ago. Did a 2-day charrette with our theater consultant, just using 9B pencils and yellow trace, and developed a 300-foot long loggia, so it's got a little bit of Rome in it, but it needed to be an urban edge. Rather than put the building on the corner, what we're doing is using this edge in the building to enframe a public plaza that can be shared by all. And as well, it's used by skateboarders, by bikers, pedestrians, and so forth, and really becomes a public space. There is no lobby. The porch is the lobby. Again, it's a teaching facility, but when you go in, of course, off to your left are these music rooms and drama practice rooms, and then you slide to your right into the slot, into the theater. The theater, the rake of that is actually inscribed on the rake and the profile of the facade along the south, and you can see that in the section. You can see the stage is at the ground level, right, even with the ground, so they actually make their sets in the wood shop in the Wheels building, pull it across the sidewalks there, and then just roll it in the backstage in just almost seamless way. Easy setup. And then the auditorium is all made out of local red oak plywood that's kind of folded, and you get your acoustic properties out of that. We wanted a connection to the outside, so we imagined a monumental window that would have its figural presence on the inside and bend the light around. It's all hand-troweled plaster, very soft contrast with the crispness and the geometry of the wood panels. But on the outside, of course, has its own character as well as a figure. So it's a figure element that acts as this beautiful backdrop and connection to the nature and the landscape out here. The final building in the campus is the bike building, of course, because, you know, Bentonville and bikes, right? So this is where they do their, exercise, they shoot volleyball, basketball, that sort of thing. Now, they're called the Barnstormers, and so they wanted an actual barn, and a real barn, so a barn that's naturally ventilated, that breathes through its skin, and that can ventilate upwards and outwards, and it's just a simple building. It's all wood. We painted it red because we can't come up with any other color scheme. Beautiful porch, again, to hang out underneath along the west side, adjacent to the soccer field. There's also a pump track next to it, again, for the biking. All the doors on the barn open up so it can ventilate, breathe, and you can drive through it, ride through it. It's very open, and you can kind of get a sense of it here. And then I know everybody have heard of mass timber. That's a real big thing happening today. We didn't have the money for mass timber, so what we have is a mass of timber. So it's all made by a local truss manufacturer, residential truss man. We just gang nail it all together using flitch plates and stuff. But taking just the simple gambrel barn and then expanding from that for these dormers for ventilation that create the chimney effect, as well as the porch, all of that becomes a kind of expansive venture. And so during the day, it has this beautiful kind of interpretation of a traditional Ozark barn and somewhat opaque, even though we've, and then the light, our lighting designer, as the sun set, he has it set up to where as the sun set, the lights slowly come on and it becomes somewhat translucent. And then as the sun dies behind the horizon, it becomes fully lit and transparent and becomes the beacon for the campus and an icon, really, for the town, Bentonville. So I'll leave this with you, just a few thoughts, if I could. And I hope you appreciate my insistence on the material, the spatial, the illuminated, the tactile, the geographical, the cultural, all bound together by an ambitious ethos for proposing meaningful, purposeful, and intimate spaces and places for people of all walks of life to live their lives with meaning and purpose. So how should we assess a society? Perhaps best by a society's care for its children, its elderly, for the less advantaged, by its equitable provision of a full quality of life to all, and thus, at least in part, by its architecture, by its humane social art. And we may ask, how should we assess the practice of architecture in that society? Perhaps best by its cultivation of literacy, of education, of civic gathering, of individual and collective worship, of physical and mental well-being, and thus ultimately by the demonstrated built commitment to architecture as a humane social practice. This is the fundamental and radical proposition we are making. Thank you.
Any questions?
Sure. All right, I know we're a little bit over on time, but it was well worth it, and we're going to take just 3 questions, given the time constraints. So I'm going to walk into the crowd here. Whoever raises their hand or makes direct eye contact, we've got a question back here. All right.
What process did you go through to look into what materials that could be, one, cost efficient, but still be structurally sound?
For
The projects that you couldn't use, that there was not a huge multi-million-dollar budget on.
Oh, well, I mean, where I'm at, again, the pragmatism is both a blessing and a curse. They don't want wood on the outside because they don't want maintenance, right? And then our cash crop is stone, but nobody can afford stone anymore because it used to be cheaper than vinyl tile when Faye Jones was working it. Now it's the most expensive material you can use practically, except perhaps, by the way, we're using it on that one where it's more like a field stone. So the metal is what we've come to a lot, the box rib metal, and we found a profile we really like that is almost like corduroy. It looks, you don't see the fasteners or anything. So we're looking for this abstraction. We're looking for the removal of any distractions connected with connections. So we try to remove connections or the idea that it's a kit of parts. That's why we create our own custom corner details and that sort of thing. So that costs a little bit more, but the system itself is actually quite economical. So that's why we look at it, and now we've discovered we can make it any color we want. It used to be just stuck with a color. Now you have to use a lot of it to do that, but that's pretty exciting because now you can particularize it to a setting, right, or to a certain type of expression, right? So that's how we come, and then we do a lot of studies. I mean, if I could show you all the different mock-ups and things standing out in the light, people think we're crazy. We're doing this in the parking lot of our place and stuff, you know, trying to figure out how it works. But it's really exciting for the staff as well to get involved in this sort of testing of materials. We do plywood is another thing that we figure we can use plywood if we keep it out of the rain. So we use it as ceilings or soffits, and it's quite effective in terms of putting it up and not having to put a high level of finish on it, things of that nature. So the aluminum bar grate, that was another one. It's like, what could we take that would combine agritech, like an agritech, you know, the agricultural history of the site, along with something that was more forward-looking? Well, take something and turn it into something that it wasn't intended to be, but you have to prove that it works. And so again, we work with subcontractors. We front-load the sub's involvement in the process so that we can get some degree of surety and buy-in from them as well. So all of this is, why? Because we're not going to be able to do the parametric and the formal exuberance that a lot of folks seek. It just doesn't work where we're at, and we can't afford it. So it's kind of like they say the necessity is the mother of all invention. So it's a necessity to again, take an economy of means and maximize its meaning.
Question number 2.
There's got to be, I could only do 3.
So, you guys talked about the Shelby Farms Park in Memphis and how has that helped, like, for faraway places? Like, it's a big problem that we tend to rely on getting food to faraway places. And how has that, like, what has that had an effect on the economy?
I don't have that kind of data. So, well, it's not a farm anymore. So it's called Shelby Farms, and it was a farm, but it's been transformed into a park. So it's not a working farm anymore.
And also about the color on that building that changes color in time of the day. So yes, the color on, what building was that again, that where the color changes from time of day?
Well, in Shelby Farms, it would be the visitor center, and in the other buildings, that would be the Thaden School. The one
Yeah,
with
the Thaden School, like there, how does that technology work? Like when,
Well, it works like, how many have seen sports cars or race cars, and you go up on them and like, whoa, they've been detailed with this really polished, and that you see all the metal flake in it and stuff. That creates depth in the surface. It also, believe it or not, refracts light, so it actually extends the life of the surface as well. So it's called flip-flop, is the kind of trade name for it, and so it changes in your relationship to it and in the light. So sometimes the building looks almost a pale green-gray, and other times it just kind of blends in with the plants. So the idea here is just to kind of intensify your perceptual awareness of the world you're surrounded by. And so that's all we're doing. There's the qualities that exist, we're just intensifying and making you aware of them. But that's one of the reasons we do it, yeah.
All right, one last question. Charlie, this is it, so it better be a good one.
First of all, thank you so much for coming to speak with us.
Yep.
It's been amazing learning about your projects and also chatting earlier. You mentioned with the school and that the shed, the bike shed and the bike barn, that you worked with a lighting designer, and it seems like you do a lot of work that has a direct connection to lighting. How does that play a role in your design process, and where does a dedicated lighting designer come into play in your design process?
That's a good question. So, you know, like landscape architects, I used to never work with them and lighting designers because I couldn't afford to. Now we've gotten to the point where we can't afford not to. We build them into the process. So we've been working with multiple lighting designers, but the one you're referring to is Taylor Miller and Alex Miller. And Alex was on the team that did the Frank Gehry's Louis Vuitton thing or whatever he did in Paris and all. You know, he's got a great background, but he's also good with budgets and good with connections to light suppliers. So we get him involved early, and so he knows how to interpret our drawings, and he presents lighting schemes, and we go through them room by room, what works, what doesn't work, what we can afford. So he's integrated early on, and then he does his own renderings, and we fold them into the presentations, and people, man, they get excited about it, I have to say, because it brings the building to life, especially at night, right? So when, you know, a lot of people think of buildings just from the daylight. Well, if it comes alive at night, that's pretty cool too. But you have to do that, you know, in an economic way, of course, as well. But he's pretty amazing. And the other thing that we have a general rule, but not exclusively, we don't like to see the lights. So he's a master of indirect lighting. So if you saw that hallway, you can't see the lights. There's no lights in the ceiling. And I learned a little bit of that from going to see Luis Barragan's houses and such in Mexico City. You'll never see a light in the ceiling of a Luis Barragan thing. It's all about the material and stuff, and he's using lighting from the floor or from other places hidden, and it creates an ambience that is really special. And takes us out of the kind of utilitarian or instrumental, how would you say, condition of architecture sometimes. So very often, if you don't get the lighting right, you don't get it designed correctly, it becomes the thread on the sweater, right? And the whole thing gets undone. So yeah, it's good. Consultants are amazing.
Well, help me thank Marlon Blackwell, FAIA, one more time. Thank you. But don't go anywhere, because we're actually going to draw for 8 copies of Radical Practice.
Oh, wow.
Ooh, Marlon, you want to have the honors?
No, I'll step back. I've done enough, I think. But I'll sign the books if somebody wins it.
Ellie Shockley,
All right.
first copy. Upstairs? Okay. We will hold on to it.
That's a good way to keep the crowd here for the.
Yeah.
Great. These guys are really
Emily
clever.
Berg.
Huh? Who's that?
Emily, right here.
Ah, congratulations. Yay. Bravo. Like I said,
Nate,
I'll sign
I
it.
might mispronounce your last name. Necht.
All right.
There you go.
Wow. Remember, it makes a good doorstop.
Ryan Roofer. Where's Ryan?
You already buzz out? No,
He's over
he
here.
is.
There he is.
All right.
Long time no see. Anna DeBrea. Where's Anna? Right there.
my
There you
God.
go.
And here, can I say a little bit of serendipity? So, Anna gave me her book today and signed it for me. So, one good deed deserves another. How about that? That's fantastic. Congrats. Thank you. Bravo.
Where's Drew? There he is.
Yeah.
Dave, how many more? You have
Wow,
2 more?
more serendipity.
Drawn 2 more.
See, osmosis, man.
Chartrice Jordan.
All right.
Chartrice, congrats.
Congratulations. All right. Bravo.
And one more, Dave.
Last but not least.
Bryce. Yes. Couldn't read it. He got it.
He just made that name up. He just, yeah,
Jumped
sure,
on
that's
it.
Congratulations. Well,
Yeah,
is there one more?
I can get it to her. Okay. Yeah.
Well, thank you all. It's great to be here. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.